Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created Phaser 3. Previously, we worked on updating our battle scene and we introduced some randomness into the enemy's choice of attack and the attack order. If you missed the previous videos, there will be links in the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as the complete source code for this video. There will also be links to the previous videos if you'd like to catch up. So let's get started. So now that we improved our battle scene by introducing some randomness, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on changing how we create monsters in our game, and we're going to work on persisting our monster stats between our battle sessions. So currently, when we want to create a monster, when we start a new game, we have a hard-coded monster in our party data inside our data manager. Likewise, in our battle scene, we always encounter the same monster, and we manually construct this data inside that scene. And in order to make our game more dynamic and to prepare us to have support for multiple monsters in the future, we're going to work on abstracting some of this data out of here and creating a JSON file where we can pull this monster data from. And then similar to how we're doing our items JSON and our text JSON, we can go ahead and pull in this data using our data utils, and then have methods to go ahead and create our monsters based on that data. Then that way later on in our battle scene, we can go ahead and pass an ID of a monster that we want to have for that encounter, and then we'll go ahead and create and construct our monster based on that data. And so by moving this data to our JSON file, it'll make it easier in the future to go ahead and modify our stats, and then that way we can dynamically change these on the fly without actually having to modify our code. So go ahead and do this. The first thing we're going to do is we'll go ahead and create a JSON file. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to copy this block of code here, and then let's come into our source code. Let's go into assets data, and let's make a new file, and we're going to call this monsters.json. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and have an array, and we'll go ahead and paste in our object. And so we'll need to go ahead and turn this into proper JSON. So let's go ahead and just add quotes to our various values. All right, then for our asset keys here, what we'll do is we'll jump over to this. Let's go ahead and just grab this value, come back to our JSON file. And then for our asset key, we'll just have that string. And then for our name, we'll just do the lowercase version of it. So we'll do Carno Dusk. And then what we need to do is we need to do the same thing for Iguana Night. So let's just copy that block. We'll go ahead and paste it. And then we'll go ahead and update our IDs. So we have 1, 1. Our attack IDs is 2. And if we jump over to our data manager, we'll go ahead and just copy Iguana Night. Go ahead and paste that. And we'll go ahead and save. And so now that we have our JSON file, we need to go ahead and actually load this in. So let's go ahead and jump over to our asset keys real quick. We'll come to where we have our other JSON files. And so under our data asset keys, let's go ahead and add in a new key and value. And so we'll do monsters. And then what we'll do is let's jump over to our preload scene and we'll go ahead and load this in. And so if we come to where we get our JSON, we'll go ahead and copy this line of code here. Let's go ahead and paste it. And we'll change our data asset keys to be to monsters. And then we'll have assets data and we'll have monsters JSON. So now that we're loading in our JSON data, we actually need a way to go ahead and grab this from our cache. So let's jump over to our data utils, and we're going to go ahead and make a new method for getting this data. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this block of code here. Let's go ahead and paste it. And then we'll go ahead and update our method names. We'll do get monster. So we'll do get monster by ID. And so this will not be item ID. This will be monster ID. And so this is just going to be a number, not an array. And then so we need to go ahead and grab this from our monsters JSON file. And then so what we'll want to do is we want to change how we're doing our data. So let's just copy this line of code here. We'll go ahead and paste that. And so what we'll want to do is we'll change this to be monster. And so we'll grab our monster's ID, and we want it to match our monster ID we passed to our method. And then so for our return type, we'll go ahead and return monster. We need to change this here, so we'll have monster. And then what we'll do, we'll go ahead and update our description real quick. So we'll have a utility function for retrieving a monster object from the monsters JSON file. And then we'll go ahead and update monster ID, so the monster ID to retrieve from the monsters JSON file. So now that we have our new method, we actually need to update our two classes to use this to create our monsters. So what we're going to go ahead and do is let's jump over to our battle scene. And what we'll do is when we create our activating monster, we're going to go ahead and replace this by grabbing our data from our data utils. So for our monster details, we'll go ahead and get rid of this. And so what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and do our data utils. We'll use our get monster by ID. And we'll go ahead and pass in our phaser scene, and we'll pass in the ID of 2 to grab the relevant monster. So for our data manager, we'll need to handle this a little bit differently. So we start off by creating our initial state object, and inside there, this is where we have our monster hard-coded. And what we'll want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and set this to an empty array. And after we create an instance of our data manager, we'll want to go ahead and initialize it. So we can go ahead and pass in our phaser scene so we can grab the relevant data we need. And so we'll also need to reference that same method when we start a new game because we'll want to reset our monster party back to our monster details in our JSON file. And so go ahead and support this. We'll go ahead and add a new method to our class, and we're just going to call it init. And inside here, we'll expect one parameter, and it's going to be our phaser scene. And so we'll go ahead and add in our types real quick. And so for our param for scene, this is going to be our phaser scene. And we'll go ahead and return void. So we'll just go ahead and copy this here. Let's go ahead and paste it. And then what we'll want to do is from our scene, we'll want to go ahead and get our monster by ID. And so we'll just do const, we'll do starting monster. We'll set that equal to our data utils. And we will do get monster by ID. And we'll go ahead and pass in our scene that we received as an argument. And we'll want to grab the first monster for Iguana Knight. And then we'll go ahead and set that data inside our data manager. And so we'll reference our store. We'll call our set method, and we'll need our data manager store keys, and we're going to reference our monsters in party. And then we'll go ahead and just pass in an array, and we'll have our starting monster. So then what we need to do is down in our start new game method, we'll want to go ahead and call that new method we just created. And so right before we do our save data, we're just going to do this. We'll do init, and we need to pass in our scene. And so we'll need to update this method to also expect scene as a parameter. And so we'll go ahead and just add that in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy our doc types here. And we'll go ahead and paste that above our starting new game. So now what we should be able to do is back in our preload scene. Let's come down to where we create our data manager and we load in our data. Before we load in our data, we'll want to go ahead and actually initialize our scene. So we'll do our data manager, we'll reference init, and we'll pass in our phaser scene. And so what that's going to do is after we create our instance of our data manager, we'll have our initial state. And then in our new method, we'll go ahead and just populate our monsters in our party with that single monster. All right, so then next what we'll need to do is we'll need to go ahead and update our start new game method in our title scene. So then that way we can pass in our phaser scene. So let's jump over to our title scene. We'll come down to where we do start new game, and then we'll go ahead and pass in this. So we pass in our phaser 3 scene. So then what we should be able to do is we should be able to go ahead and test. So if we go ahead and let's do new game. If we go into our game, let's go into our monsters, we'll see we have Iguana Knight. If we go ahead and let's do new game, let's go ahead and save. And if we go ahead and do refresh, if we go to continue, let's go into our monsters and we should still have Iguana Knight. And if we want to see if our data is actually coming from our JSON file, let's go ahead and jump over to our monsters JSON. And for Iguana Knight, let's go ahead and do our current HP. We'll do it at 15. Let's go ahead and do new game. Come into our monsters, we see now we pull in our monster details and our HP is at 15, and it's all done dynamically. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and reset our HP. So the next thing we're going to do for our monster data is in our battle scene, we're currently hard coding our monster to always be Carnodusk when we create our activating monster. And instead, what we want to do is we want to actually have this logic live outside the scene, and when the scene starts, we pass in which monster we want to actually fight. And by doing this, this sets us up later, so then that way we can have random world encounters and have a chance to encounter different monsters depending on the area we're in. And so in order to make this more dynamic, what we want to do is in our scene, when it gets initialized, we'll want to pass in our data. So similar to our inventory scene, when we pass in what our previous scene name was, we'll go ahead and pass in the data that we need for this scene. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to copy this block of code here. Let's come to our battle scene. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and paste that right above our battle scene. And we're going to go ahead and change our type definition to be battle scene data. And so for our battle scene, what we want to know is who our enemy monsters is going to be and our player monsters. And so instead of this being a string, this is going to be our monster type. And we're going to have an array. And so we're going to have our player monsters. And so this will be our player's current party. And so we'll make that dynamic. And then we'll go ahead and do the same thing for the active enemy monsters. And so we'll do enemy monsters, and we'll also set that up as an array. So then that way later on, we have support for battling more than one monster at a time. And now what we'll want to do is we'll want to add this to our class property so we can keep track of it. So we'll go ahead and add a new property. We'll have scene data. And this is going to be the type of our battle scene data. And then what we'll want to do is we'll come down to our init method and we'll want to go ahead and update this to take in data. Let's go ahead and add in our type. And so we'll have our param, and our type will be our battle scene data. And then what we'll want to do is pass that to our init method. So then that way we pass that up our chain. And now we want to go ahead and set that on our scene. And so we'll do this, and we'll reference our scene data. We'll set it equal to our data that we pass in. So then what we need to do next is down in our create method, when we go ahead and pass in our monster details, we'll actually want to grab this from our scene data. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm just going to comment this out real quick, and then we'll add in monster details, and we'll want to go ahead and grab this from this, our scene data, and we'll want to go ahead and grab our enemy monsters. And what we'll do is we'll grab the first monster from that array, and then down here for our active player monster, we'll do the same thing. Let's comment that out. We'll do our monster details, and we'll do this. We'll do our scene data. We'll grab our player monsters, and we'll grab that first monster from that array. So then if we want to go ahead and actually test our changes, we actually need to come into our world scene, and we'll need to go ahead and update when we call our battle scene to go ahead and pass in this data. And so what we'll do is let's come down to where we go ahead and start our battle scene. And so when we start our scene, we'll go ahead and pass in our data. So let's make a new object. We'll just call this data to pass. And then let's do const. We'll do data to pass. We'll set that equal to our object, and we'll go ahead and add in our type for this. And so for our type, this is just going to go ahead and be our battle scene data. So then what we can do here is we'll do our enemy monsters. All right, so for this, what we're going to do for the time being is we're just going to go ahead and grab this data from our data utils. And so we'll do our data utils, we'll get monster by ID, we'll pass in our scene, and then we'll pass in our ID for Chronodusk. And then later on, what we'll do is we'll add support to our tiled map for us to have multiple monsters to be in an area, and then we can randomly choose one of those monsters to have it appear. So for the time being, we'll hardcode this, and we'll come back and enhance this in our next section of our series. So then for our player monsters, we just want to reference our data manager. We'll use store, and we want to use our get method, and we're going to go ahead and grab our data manager store keys, and we want to grab our monsters in our party so we can pass those on. All right, so if we want to go ahead and test our changes, let's go ahead and do a new game. Let's go ahead and we'll come up to where we encounter monsters. And so if we go ahead and walk around in our grass, eventually we should encounter a monster, and our battle scene should start. And we should see that our enemy monster appears. We see Iguanodon appears, and if we go ahead and just do a quick attack, you'll see they use their ice shard. Everything seems to be working. Let's make sure our attack works. All right, perfect. All right, so what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and enhance our battle scene to allow us to test this scene without having to pass in our data. So similarly to what we did in our monster details scene, we're just going to add a extra check here for if our data is undefined. We're going to go ahead and set some initial details for a scene data, so then that way we can test our scene more easily. And so to go ahead and do this, we're just going to add an if statement. And so if our object.keys, and we'll do data, and we're just going to do check length. If the length is equal to 0, then what we'll go ahead and do is we'll just do our scene data, and we'll set it equal to our enemy monsters. And we're just going to go ahead and set that equal to an array. We'll do our data utils, get monster by ID. We'll pass in this scene in 2. And then for our player monsters, we're just going to go ahead and do an array. We'll do our data manager. We'll do store, get. We'll do our data manager store keys, and we'll do our monsters in party. And we're just going to go ahead and grab our first monster from that array. So then what we'll do is down in our create methods, go ahead and get rid of that code we commented out. And if we go ahead and jump over to our preload scene, if we want to test our changes, let's jump right into our battle scene. Just now our battle scene should start, and we should still see our 2 monsters appear without any issue. And so this will just make it easier to test our battle scene changes as we're going through them. All right, so one last thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and update our battle scene to go ahead and persist our monster data between each battle. So then that way, as we go from one encounter to the next, our HP will actually reflect what it should be at. So to go ahead and do this, what we need to do is down in our post-battle sequence check, we'll want to go ahead and update our data in our data manager, so then that way we're persisting that. And in order to go ahead and update this details, we'll need to keep track of what our current active monster is from our array of monsters since we changed it to now be more than one. So then that way we update the accurate monster's HP. And so to do all of this, we're going to add a new property to our class, and we're just going to call this active player monster party index. So let's come up to the top of our class. Let's add in this new property. And so we'll do active player monster party index. And what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and add our type. This is going to be number. Then down in our init method, what we'll do is we're just going to go ahead and set this to 0. And so we'll do this. We're going to do our active player monster party index, and we'll set it equal to 0 since we're going to go ahead and grab the first monster from our party. Then later on, once we add in the ability to go ahead and switch monsters, this is when we'd update that index. And so now that we've set it to 0, what we want to go ahead and do is down in our post battle sequence check. So we'll go ahead and jump down to that method. Is before we check to see if our monster is actually faded, we're going to go ahead and update our monster in our data manager. And so we're going to do our data manager. We're going to go ahead and do our store. We'll call set. And what we'll need to do is do our data manager store keys. We'll do our monsters in our party. And we need to go ahead and pass in our monsters from our array. And so we'll do our scene data and we'll do our player monsters. So then what we need to do is we just need to make sure our monster's HP and our party array is actually reflective of our current active monster. And so what we'll do is we're going to do our scene data. We'll do our player monsters. We're going to reference that new property we created. So we'll do our active player monster party index. So we have the right monster. We'll do our current HP. And we need to set it equal to our current active player monster's HP. So we'll do our active player monster. And we want to reference their current HP. So one thing we need to do is in our monster class, we actually need to go ahead and add a getter so we can grab this property. So let's jump over to our monster battle monster class, and let's go ahead and go to the top of our class, and we'll go ahead and add a new getter. And so right above get is fainted, we're just going to copy that. Let's go ahead and paste, and we're just going to do current HP, and we want to go ahead and return our current health. And this is going to return a number. And we'll go ahead and save. We jump back to our battle scene. All right, now our intelligence is working. Perfect. All right, so go ahead and test our changes. What we'll do is let's jump over to our monsters JSON file. And for Iguana Knight, we're going to go ahead and update our base attack to go ahead and be 15 so we can knock out the monster faster. Then let's jump over to our preload scene and let's jump over to our title scene. And what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure our options for our text animation and skipping our battle animations is set to off. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and close. Let's go ahead and fire off a new game. We'll come up to where we're going to encounter some monsters, and let's just validate our monster is fully healed. Go into our monster party, we're at 25 HP. Let's go ahead and save our game. And so now what we're looking to do is we're looking to get into a battle with another monster, and we want to go ahead and knock them out. And then that way we can validate our HP is persisting between our battles. And so what we'll do, we are both at 25 HP. Let's go ahead and fight. We'll knock them halfway out, and then they faint. Our monster's currently at 20 HP. And so what we should be able to do now is if we go into our monsters, we go into our party, we'll see our HP is now at 25. And so it persisted between our rounds. And then what we should be able to do is let's go ahead and get into one more battle, and we should make sure that our HP is still at 20 when that battle starts. All right, so our HP is at 20, perfect. And let's go ahead and fight real quick. We're down to 15. All right, we're still at 15, and the battle's over. If we go into our monster party, we'll see now we're at 15 HP. Perfect. All right, to go ahead and just clean up our data real quick, let's come back to our monsters JSON file, and we'll reset our base attack back to 5. All right, with that actually brings it into this video. In our next video, we're going to work on adding logic for when our player faints, and we're going to go ahead and re-heal our team and move our player to a different location. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to click source code for this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoy the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in the series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see the links on your screen now.